they're looking at the quality of online education and introducing that into the classroom. I think that some of the other innovations they're looking at, and when you talk about evaluations and that sort of thing, they've got Senate Bill 191 out there. That's probably a landmark piece of legislation. And I think that as a legislator, I want to be very involved with my background in the Department of Human Services and implementing pay for performance for all those state employees. I think it's going to be very important for me to be on the ground when we begin to implement 191 so that we're most effective in evaluating our education and our processes and relate that back into our children in our classroom.
Joyce?
Well, first of all, I'd like to ask Chuck not to rephrase my comments. As I said before, teachers need to have the ability to teach, and no one knows how to teach my children in that classroom like that teacher. Thank you.
Okay, Clarice, you'll handle this question first. What will you do if elected to protect Southern Colorado's water supply and quality?
As everybody knows, water is the lifeblood of our economic independence. I will and continue to work on water issues with farmers, ranchers throughout the Arkansas Valley. I have stopped and met with the farm markets up and down the Arkansas Valley this summer. I have spent several hours with them discussing the issues that are so important to them. And when I get to the state capital, I'm going to continue that fight. And I'm going to continue to fight and make sure that our water stays here in the Arkansas Valley.
Water in our valley has been, is a precious commodity, and I really think we have faced two major issues when it comes to our water. First of all, and as I started to mention before my time ran out, that we're going to find ourselves in so many cases, us versus them, being Denver and some of the markets that want to either take and capture jobs, or in this case, take and capture our water. I think water law is dictated a lot by the court system out there. As legislators, I think some of the things we can do is to promote a community interaction with our farmers. One of the things that happens is that farmers out there find that as generations leave the farm, or as you have generations that don't want to go on to farming, that they find that perhaps selling their water is the most productive thing. And I think as communities, if we're concerned about keeping water and agriculture alive down here, I think we have to partnership with farmers. Now, the Pueblo Water Board bought a bunch of water shares, and recently you've seen that they've done a lease to the Ordway Cattle Company. And I think there's a fine example of how that water, if we as a community capture that water, that we can put it back into service in our community down there. The Water Board makes about $250,000 a year on that, but the Ordway Cattle Company in turn spends $20 million buying feedstock from local farmers. And so here you have really the idea of a community partnership. You saw one recently where Didosho Farms went into a partnership with a water group, and it's the same thing. You're seeing these partnerships form up. I think if we're going to be concerned for keeping water in this valley, that we've got to join up with the farmers and say, yeah, you own the water, but we are committed to help you keep it here in the valley and help you with your business.
Okay, Chuck, you'll answer this question first. The prison industry in Southern Colorado has taken some really big hits in the last few years. Do you have any suggestions on how to use those closed or underused facilities?
Oh, yeah, actually I do. Having worked at the state hospital, I have to tell you, the state hospital is probably typical of most state buildings throughout the state of Colorado, and they are so old and so in disrepair. There is no money for capital construction, absolutely none. And so there hasn't been for a long, long time. Now, I say that, however, with the exploding prison population that we had, DOC was always on the front line of capital development. So these buildings are very new in general. They're very valuable. So I think there's a couple things that we could do. First of all, there are a lot of state entities, including Department of Corrections, who rents an entire building in Colorado Springs for the headquarters. Why don't they move in and save us a whole load of rent money? I think there's an opportunity. There are a lot of actually state buildings out there that are in such bad disrepair they're not being able to be used, and we do rent a lot. And so there's a tremendous amount of money that we could capture in terms of saved revenue if we were to move some of the state facilities into those buildings and save that rent. The other thing is that perhaps as a state legislature, I mean, we offer incentives to businesses locally here, $2 or $3 million at a whack. Perhaps there's some way that the state could find themselves in a position to develop some sort of incentive with those facilities, or sell those facilities and add it to the state budget where we can put it back to work, maybe in education.
Clarice?
Well, once I get to the state capitol and have the opportunity to review the budget, I would like to be able to repurpose those facilities, hopefully with vocational programs. They have kitchens that are fully operating. I'd also like to look at opening those back up to our vets who are coming back home. I think it's very important that they also have a place to come back home, rehabilitate, get comfortable with being home and with their family, and receiving medical needs that they need that are close to home and that are not in Denver. Again, I think putting people back to work is one of our key things that we have to keep in mind, and by repurposing those, we can do that with more jobs.
You're good? Okay. Okay, Clarice, you'll handle this question first. The Colorado Personhood Amendment did not make the November ballot this year, but it clearly is an issue that is not going to go away, and it may even be introduced this coming session. What is your position on that issue?
Well, today we have 10.6% unemployed. 8,000 people are out looking for jobs. That's what I'm working on, and that's where my campaign is focused, is getting those people back to work. When I'm knocking on doors, I'm not hearing about the Personhood Amendment. What I'm hearing is jobs, 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 and the economy. How are we going to get back to work and provide for our families? That's what I'm hearing at doors.
Okay. Chuck?
You know, the personhood was defeated by a 2-to-1 margin. I think the voters have spoken in that particular case, and that's been 2 times. I think as a legislature, you don't walk up there with your personal opinion. Now, in terms of my personal opinion, obviously, I do believe that the government does not need to inject themselves into women's lives in particular. Those are decisions that women make. I just really think this is a voter issue. I think that voters have demonstrated what they feel about it, and as a legislator, I think that certainly my first job is to honor the view of the issue, the wishes of the voters.
Okay. Chuck, you'll handle this one first. Do you support or oppose the ballot measure legalizing the possession and use of small amounts of marijuana?
Again, this is a voter issue. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, the voters will decide that out there on a ballot measure. So it's really not a case where we vote on that sort of thing. Now, some of the arguments for and against that I've heard, obviously the one argument for is that it will decriminalize the one most common drug out there. It will take it out of the hands of criminals and put it into the hands of a business, a regulated business. The other argument you hear out there is that once it becomes a regulated business, it will become safer because businesses will not sell to kids. The other thing is that you'll hear the argument for it that it will generate a lot of jobs, legitimate jobs, and a lot of revenue. Having said that, our governor and many of us, I guess I just gave her my position. A lot of us aren't comfortable at this time. Out knocking on doors, and I think I've knocked on 9,000 so far this campaign cycle. I have not heard that issue come up but one time, and it was over medical marijuana. So it really isn't. It'll be interesting to see what the voters have to say about it. But it's not a big issue in the street out there. Jobs, economy, education, and health care are the top 4 that I bump into.
Okay. Clarice?
This decision is in the hands of the voters, and once the voters decide and it comes across my desk, then I will be able to make a positive impact and a very informed decision. But until then, I don't have enough information on it to make it take either side.
Okay. Any other comments on that? Okay. We'll move on to the next question, and Clarice, you'll handle this one first. There's been a lot of discussion about obtaining more jobs for Pueblo. What specifically would you do to bring more private sector jobs to this district?
Well, I've been out visiting with many of the job creators here in Pueblo, in La Junta, in Rocky Ford, in Penrose, and what I'm hearing from the business owners themselves is that they're over-regulated, over-mandated, and are paying too many fees. My first initiative is going to be to help those small business owners overcome that obstacle and be able to bring more jobs and employ more people into our community.
Okay. Chuck?
I'm really a small business advocate. You know, we talk all the time about small business being the backbone of our economy. Yet it's kind of interesting that you see in Pueblo, in particular, that's where the greatest part of experience comes in, is that, you know, we offer huge incentives to bigger companies. You know, if they promise to hire 100 employees or whatever, we offer $2 or $3 million in incentives. I think what we've got to do is we look at small business and say, what have we done with small business? And when it comes to regulation, there's a lot that we could do at the state level. Most regulations are either federal or come at the county level in the permitting processes, the zoning processes, the water tap processes, the list goes on and on. A couple of the things we can do, you know, at this point, the projections for revenue intake for this next year are $239 million more than anticipated at this point. One of the things that was done a year or two ago was called the Innovative Investor Tax Credit. And what that did was offer a $20,000 tax incentive to investors. Now, what happens right now is we've got a lot of money on the sideline. Everybody will admit there's a ton of money on the sideline waiting to see for something to happen and invest. What it was also known as the Angel Tax Credit. And what that did was to entice some of these investors to get out there and support small businesses. That provided seed money for small businesses. Now, in the first year of that bill, it produced 21 jobs in 13 different cities. So that's one of the things we can do for small business. That wasn't funded last year, but with the opportunity, with the $239 million, I think there are a lot of people going to be scrambling for that money. But I'm a proponent for small business and would like to see more incentives like these microloans for small business. And the other thing is we can support our small business development centers. The data indicates that every dollar spent, $12 in return to the business people. Thank you.
Clarice?
I am the pro-business candidate, and as I said before, I will work to release those mandates and those regulations and those overtaxes on our small business owners so we can get people back to work.
One of the initiatives that I'm eager to support is this concept of Hire Colorado. What that does is gives our contractors the first crack at Colorado contracts. It keeps them from going out of state and going even worse out of the country. Now, what's so important about that is that for every dollar spent in a community, it circulates 10 times. And so when you give a contract out of state, if it's a $50 million contract, you might as well back the U-Haul up to the bank and send it across the Utah state line. What I am saying is let's give our Colorado contractors the first crack at this thing, and that's what Hire Colorado will do. What they'll do is turn around, and part of that component is to hire a Colorado workforce. And so really the contrast here is, do you let, for a few bucks less, do you let it go out of state and see $50 billion leave the state of Colorado? No. And so Hire Colorado is another opportunity we have